Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I'm here today with my January reading wrap-up. Now, new year, new approach. I'm going to try very brief monthly wrap-ups because I know they've been too long in the past. So I'm going to attempt to very quickly give you a brief overview of each of the books I read in January. And I had a great start to my reading year. So I finished reading 4 print books and 2 books on audio in January. All were excellent. I mean, it was a really good reading month. So I started out the month and the year with a book that seemed very appropriate for me, Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times by Catherine May. And that subtitle says it all. This is a memoir, and that's what it's about: the power of rest and retreat in difficult times. So she is using the word wintering in both a physical and metaphorical sense here. So the book is organized by month from September to March, and she has very cleverly associated what is happening in the natural world with the seasons, with difficult things that she's been through in her life. This seemed particularly relevant for me this year. At the beginning of January, when I was reading this, I was still stuck in a months-long relapse of my chronic illness. I am feeling better now at my normal baseline of still need a nap, but able to function during the day, and this was perfect. As you can see, I still haven't had time to transcribe all the fabulous quotes and passages that I wanted to remember. There's so much of that in here. It's a very thoughtful book, and I found it very comforting as well. And I related it to my chronic illness, but this is about any kind of difficult times. Whatever you're feeling anxious about, whatever is bothering you, that's what she's talking about here. In fact, during this time, they have a little crisis with their son. She's got some health problems. She relates this concept of wintering to many different kinds of difficult times. And there's also a heavy focus on nature, which I really loved. And that makes me want to read her other book as well. Next up, I did a buddy read with Melinda at A Web of Stories. We read Writers and Lovers by Lily King. I really enjoyed this book. I found it very compelling. It is the story of 31-year-old Casey, who in 1997 has moved back to Cambridge, Massachusetts. She's kind of at loose ends. Her mother died recently. She is definitely still grieving. Melinda and I both agreed this is a book about grief and about healing and moving on with your life. And as the title indicates, she is a writer, or she wants to be a writer. She's got an MFA, she's been to writers' workshops, she's been working on a novel for 6 years. And so here, when she moves back to Cambridge, her goal is to get this novel finished and hopefully published. And she's working as a waitress to make money, living in this tiny shack. Literally, it used to be a garden shed. And lovers, there are 2 men involved in this story, but Casey's a mess at the beginning of this novel. She is in no shape to have a relationship. So you can imagine how well that goes at the beginning. But through the novel, Casey is learning about herself, learning how to deal with her grief, and eventually beginning to move forward. Melinda and I had some great discussions on this book. It's a very thoughtful, character-driven book, but a lot happens as well. There are quite a few plot surprises as well. We both enjoyed it, and I think that who knows? It's only January, but this may end up on my best of 2025 list. At the beginning of the month, I was also listening to a fabulous novel on audio that is definitely on my best of 2025 list. And that is The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. Kate Quinn specializes in historical fiction, and she is very, very good at that, with loads of research behind her books. I enjoyed her novel, The Diamond Eye, also on audio, but The Briar Club, I really loved. It's my favorite of hers so far. And my book group overwhelmingly loved it as well. And we don't usually all agree on a book, but we did on this one. It got an average rating from 1 to 10 of 8.8, which is extremely high for our group. Everybody who was at the meeting rated it an 8 or a 9. People rarely give 10s. I think there were a couple of 10s on this one, but I don't know. We kind of avoid the 10s. I don't know why. This is set in 1950 in a women's boarding house in Washington, D.C. So there's a whole cast of characters, and it was excellent on audio. A single narrator, but a very talented narrator who captured a different voice and different personality for each of the women living in the house. And by looking at this whole group of women, what the author was able to do was shine a light on all kinds of issues that affected women in the 1950s. Everything from what was going on politically at the time with McCarthyism and the Korean War, to women being pushed out of jobs because World War II was over and the men had come home, to domestic abuse. I mean, everything. She packed so much into this novel, but it didn't feel overwhelming, and it wasn't hard to keep track of the characters. That was a concern for me at the very beginning, but each character gets her own full chapter to tell her story. And so you get to know each of them very, very well. Like I said, everyone in my book group loved it, which doesn't happen often. Next up, I read The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton for the first time. As a child of the 70s and teen of the 70s and early 80s, I don't know how I possibly missed this book back then, but I did, and I am so glad I finally read it. In case you too have been living under a rock for the last 50 years like me, this is the story of a very tight-knit group of boys, young men, in the mid-1960s in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They're called greasers. That's what they call themselves, and that's what everyone else calls them, for their long hair that they wear greased back. Many of them wear leather jackets or denim jackets. Their enemies, in terms of the social strata, are called the socials, or as they say, the socias. These are the kids at their school and not in their neighborhoods, but in their area, who are very wealthy, who drive fancy cars, who wear really nice clothes, very clean cut, but not necessarily nice kids. I mean, many of the socias are actually kind of spoiled and a little cruel, some a lot cruel. So the narrator here is Pony Boy. That is his given name. He's the youngest of the group at 14, lives with his two older brothers because their parents have died. They're very close-knit. And when he and Johnny, a 16-year-old in their group, but the smallest of the group, and Pony Boy and Johnny are out late one night, and a group of socias attack them. And that sets off a horrible chain of events. This was everything everyone has always told me it was. So much emotional depth here. What these kids are living through what their lives are like, the sorrows, but also the joys, the found family that they've created. Absolutely wonderful novel from beginning to end. And now I want to see the 1983 movie adaptation, which is starring like every teen heartthrob from my youth. My second audiobook in January was 2 Degrees by Alan Gratz, a well-known middle grade author who usually writes historical fiction, though this is set in the present day. It's about climate change. That's what the 2 degrees refers to. And the novel follows the stories of 3 different teenagers in different parts of the world, different parts of North America, all experiencing the drastic effects of climate change. So Akira is in California and gets caught in a wildfire when she's horseback riding in the Sierra Nevadas. Owen and George live in Manitoba, Canada, and are out by themselves when they run into some very hungry, desperate polar bears who can't hunt when they're supposed to because the ice is melted. And finally, Natalie down in Miami, who is dealing with the big one, a huge Category 5 hurricane headed straight to Miami with a never before heard of unbelievable storm surge. Each of these kids ends up out on their own with their life in peril because of climate change. The stories are all very engrossing. This was a very compelling novel. The audio was very well done with different narrators for the different stories. So each of the kids had their own personality. It was excellent. There was a lot of tension and suspense in this novel, so probably not for younger middle grade readers. I think it could be kind of scary for them, but I mean, it's scary for me. So 2 Degrees by Alan Gratz, up to his normal excellent standards. And finally, I just finished reading The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon, a super creepy, supernatural thriller set in a small town in Vermont. Pretty much all of the scenes taking place in the middle of winter with lots of snow and very cold temperatures. So it was the perfect January read, and that's why I saved it for winter. I like ghost stories. I'm not big on fantasy or horror. And you could say this maybe has a foot in each of those categories, but I do like supernatural thrillers. I like ghost stories. I don't want to give too much away. This isn't strictly speaking a ghost story, but it's along those lines. It takes place in 2 different timelines, 1908 and the present day. Lots and lots of suspense. I was reading this late into the night every day, and the ending wraps everything up, pulls all the pieces together in a very satisfying way. So that's The Winter People by Jennifer McMahon. Hi, this is Saturday Sue, popping in for a moment to interrupt Thursday Sue, because today's February 1st, and I actually finished another book for January just last night, squeezed in a YA graphic novel before the end of the month. So I didn't want to skip it in my month-end wrap-up. I wanted to fill you in. I finished reading Lunar New Year Love Story by Jean Luen Yang and Liuan Pham, a very talented team. I have read graphic novels from both of them in the past, and they are both extremely talented. And here they've brought together the male and female perspective and combined their talents, and it is a wonderful book. Yes, as the title points out, it is a love story, but it is so much more than that. Essentially, this is a coming-of-age story about Valentina, this young woman who, she's got some love issues, but she's struggling with a lot in her life. She's got family issues. Some family secrets have just come out. She's met family members she really didn't know before. She's dealing with a lot. She lives alone with her dad, and they've always just kept to themselves. She's also just starting to learn about her Vietnamese heritage and culture. Her dad didn't bring a lot of that into their lives. She's in high school, so of course she's dealing with some friendship issues as well. And it's just a wonderful story with complex emotions, a lot of plot twists, fascinating setting in the Vietnamese, well, the whole Asian American community where she lives, which I think is California. She starts from looking back at her childhood when she found so much joy in ballet class, and she is obsessed with Valentine's Day, and her name is Valentina. She thinks her parents named her after Valentine's Day. The interstitial pages are beautiful with all these different drawings. I don't want to give anything away, but there is possibly a thread of magical realism in this, which I'm not always into. But, I think you can interpret it as magical or spirit related, but you can also interpret the visions that Valentina has as her own self-conscious, kind of telling her she's not enough, lifting her up when she's a kid, and as she becomes a teenager, telling her she's not enough, she's doomed to fail, and things like this. It's the kind of negative messaging that is in a lot of teenagers' brains. So you've got that going on as well. It was a wonderful YA graphic novel with a lot of depth to it, and I really enjoyed it. Didn't want to leave it out of my monthly wrap-up. That was my reading month in January. Excellent all the way around. Really great start to the year. And I want to hear about your reading month. Tell me in the comments down below, what did you read in January? What was your favorite book? I hadn't thought about my favorite. Probably The Briar Club by Kate Quinn, but Writers and Lovers by Lily King is a close second runner-up. So tell me, what was your favorite book that you read last month? I would love to hear about it.